Maggie Holloway pressed her palm against the cold gravestone snow swirling around her pregnant belly and whispered goodbye to the only man who ever loved her. 3 days without food. 2 months alone. One secret growing inside her that would destroy everything if anyone found out. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to, and winter was just beginning. Welcome to our channel. If you want to follow Maggie's journey to the very end, subscribe now and comment your city below. Let me see how far this story travels. The shovel hit frozen ground, and Maggie Holloway's arms shook from exhaustion. 2 months. 2 months since James fell from that horse and never got up. 2 months of pretending she could survive alone on this godforsaken piece of land he'd called their future. She wiped her face with a trembling hand, not sure anymore if it was sweat or tears freezing on her cheeks. Maggie. She spun around. Pastor William stood at the edge of the small cemetery, his black coat dusted with snow. Pastor. She straightened instinctively, pulling her shawl tighter across her middle. I didn't hear you coming. I reckoned I'd find you here. He stepped closer, his weathered face creased with concern. 3rd time this week, you've visited James's grave. Folks are starting to talk. Let them talk. Now, Maggie. What do they want from me, Pastor? Her voice cracked. My husband's been dead 2 months. Am I supposed to dance at the saloon? Pastor Williams held up both hands. Nobody's saying that, but there's been some discussion at the church meeting last night about your situation. Maggie's stomach tightened. My situation. The Hendersons offered to buy your land. Fair price, they said. Enough for you to go back east, start over with your family. I don't have family back east. James was my family. Then stay in town. Martha Quinn's got a room at her boarding house. You could work for your keep until... Until what? Maggie interrupted. Until I find another husband. Is that what the church decided for me? The pastor's silence told her everything. Maggie turned back to the grave, her jaw tight. Thank you for your concern, Pastor. I'll manage. Will you, though? His voice softened. Winter's coming hard this year. The almanac says it'll be the worst in a decade. A woman alone out there miles from town. He paused. It ain't safe, Maggie. It ain't right. She didn't answer. After a moment, she heard his footsteps retreat through the snow. Alone again. That night, Maggie sat by the dying fire in her cabin, hands pressed against her belly. 4 months along now, maybe 4.5. Hard to know for certain without a doctor, and she couldn't see Doc Patterson without the whole town finding out within the hour. A widow, pregnant, no husband to claim the child. She knew exactly what they'd say, what they'd call her. I'm sorry, little one, she whispered to the life growing inside her. I'm so sorry I can't give you better than this. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows James had installed just last spring. He'd been so proud of those windows. Real glass all the way from Denver. We're building something here, Maggie. He'd said, his eyes bright with that dream she'd fallen in love with. Something that'll last. Something we can pass down to our children. Children. He never knew. She'd planned to tell him that night had made his favorite supper and everything. But he'd ridden out to check the fence line and never come back. The Henderson boy found him the next morning, neck broken, his horse grazing peacefully nearby. Just like that. One moment, a future. The next, nothing. Maggie pulled her shawl tighter and made a decision. She couldn't stay here. The supplies were running low, the winter was coming, and her secret wouldn't stay hidden much longer. Tomorrow she'd ride into Stillwater Creek and throw herself on Martha Quinn's mercy. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all she had. Dawn came, gray and bitter. Maggie packed what little she could carry: James's pocket watch, their wedding photograph, a change of clothes, the small pouch of coins she'd found hidden in his desk. Not much, not nearly enough. She was saddling, her mare fingers numb despite her gloves, when the first real snowflakes began to fall. Just a little snow, she told herself. I can make it. It's only 8 miles. But Montana winter didn't care about her plans. 2 miles out, the snow turned into a wall of white. Maggie couldn't see 10 feet ahead. The wind cut through her coat like it wasn't even there. Her mare Bessie stumbled and whinnied in protest. "Come on, girl, just a little further." But she had no idea which direction further even was anymore. The trail had disappeared under the snow. Every direction looked the same white, endless, deadly. Maggie's hands lost feeling first, then her feet. The cold crept up her legs into her chest, wrapping around her heart like a fist. "No," she gasped. "No, not like this. Please God, not like this." Bessie stumbled again, and this time she went down hard. Maggie flew from the saddle, hitting the frozen ground with a force that knocked the breath from her lungs. She lay there gasping, snow collecting on her face. "This is it," she thought. "This is how I die, alone in the snow with my baby, and no one will ever know what happened to us." She closed her eyes, and then she heard it. Hoofbeats, coming closer. "Hey! Hey, you there!" A man's voice, deep and urgent, cutting through the howling wind. Maggie tried to respond, but her lips wouldn't move. She felt hands on her shoulders turning her over. A face swam into view. Dark eyes, a strong jaw, a hat pulled low against the storm. Ma'am, can you hear me?" She managed a sound, something between a groan and a word. "All right. You're all right now. I've got you." He lifted her like she weighed nothing, and the last thing Maggie felt before darkness claimed her was warmth. Blessed, impossible warmth. She woke to firelight and the smell of coffee. For a moment, Maggie didn't know where she was. The ceiling above her was rough-hewn timber, unfamiliar. The blanket wrapped around her was thick wool, not her own threadbare quilt. And her boots were gone. She sat up too fast, and the world spun. "Easy now." A man sat by the fire, turning to look at her. He was tall, even sitting down broad-shouldered, with dark hair touched with gray at the temples. His face was weathered, lined by years of sun and wind, but his eyes were kind, brown and warm like summer earth. "Where am I?" Her voice came out rough, barely more than a whisper. "My cabin, about 3 miles north of where I found you." He rose and crossed to her, holding out a tin cup. "Drink this, it'll warm you up." Maggie accepted the cup with shaking hands, coffee strong and hot. She took a sip and felt life returning to her frozen limbs. "Your horse is in the barn," the man continued, settling into a chair across from her. "She's fine. Little shaken, but no lasting damage. You, on the other hand—" He shook his head. "Another 10 minutes out there, and I'd have been digging 2 graves come spring." 2. The word slipped out before Maggie could stop it. The man's eyes dropped to her midsection, and Maggie realized with horror that her coat had fallen open. Her dress pulled tight across her belly, left nothing to the imagination. She yanked the blanket up, heat flooding her face. "Ma'am," the man's voice was gentle, "I ain't here to judge you. Whatever your story is, it's yours to tell or not. I'm just glad I found you in time." Maggie stared at him, waiting for the disgust, the accusation, the assumption that any respectable widow wouldn't be in this condition. It didn't come. "I'm Sam," he said instead. "Sam Brennan. I work as foreman at the Double Diamond Ranch about 10 miles east of here. This is my winter cabin. I use it when I'm checking the range." "Maggie." She cleared her throat. "Maggie Holloway." Holloway. Sam's brow furrowed. "James Holloway's widow." Her chest tightened. "You knew James?" "Knew of him. Good man from what I heard. Worked hard, loved his wife, had big dreams." Sam's expression softened. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Holloway." The kindness in his voice nearly undid her. Maggie looked down at her coffee, blinking hard. "Thank you." They sat in silence for a moment, the fire crackling between them. "Where were you headed?" Sam asked finally. In that storm, with conditions like they were, must have been something important. Stillwater Creek. Maggie wrapped both hands around the cup, drawing warmth from it. I was going to find work at the boarding house. My husband's land. She hesitated. I can't manage it alone. Not through winter. Not. She touched her belly without thinking. Not in your condition, Sam finished quietly. Maggie nodded, shame burning in her throat. Well. Sam stood, moving to the stove where a pot simmered. Storm's not letting up anytime soon. You'll have to stay here tonight, maybe tomorrow too. But soon as it clears, I'll take you into Stillwater myself. Make sure you get there safe. You don't have to do that. No, ma'am. I don't have to. He ladled something into a bowl and brought it to her. Stew rich with meat and vegetables. But I'm going to anyway. Maggie stared at the bowl, then at him. Why? Sam's jaw tightened, and for a moment something flickered in those warm brown eyes. Pain, maybe. Or memory. Because 5 years ago, someone should have helped my wife when she needed it. His voice was rough, and no one did. So now when I see someone in trouble, I help. That's just how it is. He turned away before she could respond, busying himself at the stove. Maggie ate in silence, questions burning on her tongue. Your wife. What happened to her? But she didn't ask. Some stories weren't ready to be told. The storm raged for 2 days. 2 days of shared meals and careful conversation. 2 days of Sam sleeping on the floor while Maggie took his bed despite her protests. 2 days of learning the rhythm of this quiet man who asked nothing of her and expected nothing in return. She learned that he hummed while he cooked, that he talked to the horses in the barn like they were old friends, that he kept a worn Bible by his bedside but never mentioned God. She learned that he'd been a deputy sheriff in Kansas once before something changed him, that he'd been drifting for years before settling at the Double Diamond, that he was 34 years old and had stopped believing in much of anything a long time ago. But you believe in helping strangers, Maggie said on the second night as the wind finally began to die. Sam poked at the fire, not looking at her. I believe in doing what's right, whether it makes a difference or not. That sounds lonely. He was quiet for a long moment. It is. Maggie wanted to reach out to touch his hand to offer some comfort for the grief she could see carved into every line of his face. But she didn't. She barely knew this man. And she had her own grief to carry. Morning of the third day dawned clear and bright. The world transformed into a glittering white landscape. Sam had the horses ready by the time Maggie emerged from the cabin. Road should be passable now, he said, helping her mount. We'll take it slow, but we should make Stillwater by noon. Maggie looked back at the cabin, at the place where a stranger had saved her life, and asked nothing in return. Sam. He looked up at her, squinting against the sun. Thank you. For everything. Something shifted in his expression. Something almost like hope. Don't thank me yet, Mrs. Holloway. Stillwater Creek ain't the friendliest town for a woman in your situation. You might have a harder road ahead than you think. Maggie straightened in the saddle, one hand resting on her belly. I've survived worse. Sam studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. A smile, the first real smile she'd seen from him, tugged at the corner of his mouth. Yes, ma'am. I reckon you have. They rode toward Stillwater Creek together, two broken people carrying their secrets through the snow. Neither of them knew what waited ahead. Neither of them knew that this frozen morning was just the beginning. But something had shifted. Something had started. And in the vast white silence of Montana, winter hope began to take root. Stillwater Creek emerged from the horizon like a mirage. A cluster of buildings huddled against the cold smoke rising from chimneys into the pale sky. Maggie had passed through once before with James when they'd first arrived in the territory. It had seemed charming then, promising. Now it looked like judgment waiting to happen. There's the boarding house. Sam pointed to a 2-story structure near the end of the main street. Martha Quinn's place. She's particular but fair. If she takes you in, you'll be safe there. If... Sam's jaw tightened. Like I said, this town has its opinions about certain things. They tied the horses outside the boarding house and climbed the steps to the porch. Before Sam could knock, the door swung open. Martha Quinn stood in the doorway, a tall, stern woman in her 60s with steel gray hair pulled back severely and eyes that could cut glass. She looked from Sam to Maggie and back again, her expression unreadable. Sam Brennan, didn't expect to see you in town. Mrs. Quinn. Sam removed his hat. I found this lady stranded in the blizzard. She's looking for work and a place to stay. Martha's gaze fixed on Maggie. It traveled from her face to her midsection, lingering there with unmistakable understanding. Is that so? Maggie lifted her chin. My name is Margaret Holloway. My husband James passed 2 months ago. I need honest work and a roof over my head. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Martha said nothing for a long moment. The silence stretched heavy and suffocating. Then she stepped back and opened the door wider. Get inside before you catch your death, both of you. We'll discuss terms over tea. Maggie exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. The boarding house kitchen was warm and smelled of fresh bread. Martha moved efficiently, setting out cups and pouring tea without asking if anyone wanted any. James Holloway. She sat down across from Maggie, her sharp eyes never wavering. I remember him. Came through here about a year ago, didn't he? Full of big plans. Yes, ma'am. And now he's dead, and you're carrying his child, and you've got nowhere to go. It wasn't a question, but Maggie answered anyway. Yes, ma'am. Martha turned to Sam. How'd you find her? Pure chance. I was heading to my winter cabin when the storm hit. Saw her horse go down about 2 miles from the trail. And you brought her here? Yes, ma'am. Martha studied him for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then she turned back to Maggie. I've got rules in this house, Mrs. Holloway. You follow them. We'll get along fine. You break them, you're out. Understood? Understood. I need help in the kitchen and with the cleaning. Room and board plus a small wage. You'll work hard, you'll keep your head down, and you'll stay out of trouble. Martha's voice hardened. And you'll keep that baby quiet when guests are trying to sleep. I run a respectable establishment. I won't cause any problems, Mrs. Quinn. You have my word. Martha held her gaze for another moment. Then almost imperceptibly she nodded. All right then. Sam, help her bring her things up to the back room. 2nd floor end of the hall. Mrs. Holloway, you start work tomorrow at 5 in the morning. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Martha waved a dismissive hand. Don't thank me yet. Winter's long, and this town's got a short memory for kindness and a long one for scandal. You'll find that out soon enough. She rose and left the kitchen, her footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. Maggie looked at Sam. What did she mean by that? Sam's expression was troubled. She meant that people talk, Mrs. Holloway, and in a town this size, talk can be dangerous. I'm not ashamed of my baby. I know. He stood picking up her small bag. But not everyone will see it that way. Just be careful. That's all I'm saying. He carried her things upstairs and set them in the small, sparse room that would be her new home. A narrow bed, a washstand, a single window looking out over the snow-covered street. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd had this morning. Well, Sam stood awkwardly in the doorway, hat in hands. I should get back to the ranch. The boss will be wondering what happened to me. Of course. Neither of them moved. Mrs. Holloway. Maggie. She surprised herself. Please, after everything you can call me Maggie. Something warm flickered in his eyes. Maggie then. I come into town every couple weeks for supplies. If you need anything at all, you just tell Martha to get word to me at the Double Diamond. That's kind of you. It's not kindness. He looked away, jaw tight. It's just, I want to know you're all right. That's all. Maggie felt something shift in her chest, something dangerous and hopeful and terrifying all at once. I'll be all right, Sam. I always am. He nodded, still not meeting her eyes. I'll see you around then? Yes, I expect you will. He tipped his hat and was gone, his boots heavy on the stairs. Maggie stood at her window and watched him ride away until he was nothing but a dark speck against the endless white. Then she turned back to her bare little room, pressed her hand against her belly, and began to unpack her new life. That night, lying in the narrow bed, Maggie allowed herself to think about him. Sam Brennan. The sadness in his eyes. The gentleness of his hands. The way he'd looked at her, not with judgment, but with understanding. He'd lost someone too. She could see it in every line of his body, every careful word. Don't be foolish, she whispered to herself. You're a widow carrying another man's child. The last thing you need is complications. But as sleep finally claimed her, it was Sam's face she saw. His voice she heard. I want to know you're all right. And despite everything, despite the fear and the grief and the uncertainty of tomorrow, Maggie Holloway smiled. 3 weeks passed and Maggie learned the rhythm of Martha Quinn's boarding house like a second heartbeat. Rise at 4:30. Stoke the fires before the guests woke. Start the coffee mix, the biscuit dough, fry the bacon. Serve breakfast with a smile and lowered eyes. Clear the dishes, scrub the pots, make the bed, sweep the floors. Prepare lunch, prepare dinner. Fall into bed exhausted. Repeat. It was hard work, backbreaking some days. But Maggie welcomed the exhaustion. It left no room for grief, no space for fear. No time to wonder what the future held for a pregnant widow with no family and no prospects. Martha Quinn, for all her sternness, proved to be a fair employer. She didn't ask questions about Maggie's past or comment on her growing belly. She simply expected the work to be done and done well. You've got capable hands, Martha said one morning, watching Maggie knead bread dough with practiced efficiency. Where'd you learn to bake like that? My mother. She died when I was 16, but she made sure I knew my way around a kitchen first. Martha nodded, something softening in her sharp features. Good woman, then. The kind who prepares her children for the worst while hoping for the best. Yes, ma'am. That was her exactly. They worked in companionable silence after that, an understanding forming between them that didn't require words. But if Martha Quinn accepted Maggie without judgment, the rest of Stillwater Creek was not so charitable. It started small. Sideways glances when Maggie walked to the general store for supplies. Conversations that stopped abruptly when she entered a room. Women who crossed to the other side of the street rather than pass her directly. Maggie pretended not to notice, but she noticed. They're talking about me, she said to Martha one evening after the dinner guests had retired to their rooms. I hear them whispering when they think I can't hear. Martha didn't look up from her mending. Let them talk. Words can't hurt you unless you let them. It's not me I'm worried about. Maggie's hand went to her belly. It's the baby. What kind of life will my child have in a town that's already decided we're shameful? Martha set down her needle and thread, fixing Maggie with a steady gaze. Let me tell you something, girl. I've lived in this town for 40 years. I've watched people build each other up and tear each other down. I've seen saints turn into sinners and sinners turn into saints. And you know what I've learned? Maggie shook her head. People's opinions are like the weather. They change with the wind. Today they might look at you and see scandal. But give them time, give them a reason to see different, and they'll forget they ever thought ill of you. Martha picked up her mending again. You just keep your head high and your heart clean. The rest will sort itself out. Maggie wanted to believe her. She truly did. But then Sunday came, and everything changed. Maggie had been avoiding church since her arrival, claiming fatigue or extra work that needed doing. But Martha insisted. You can't hide forever, she said, handing Maggie her good shawl. Besides, people are starting to say you think you're too good for the Lord's house. Better to show your face and let them see you've got nothing to be ashamed of. So Maggie went. The church was a small white building with a modest steeple packed with townspeople in their Sunday finest. Maggie slipped into a back pew, hoping to remain unnoticed. She should have known better. Pastor Williams, the same pastor who'd visited her at James's grave, stood at the pulpit, his eyes scanning the congregation. When they landed on Maggie, something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe? Or concern? The service began normally enough. Hymns, prayers, scripture readings. Maggie let the familiar rituals wash over her, remembering Sunday mornings with her mother, then later with James. Then, Pastor Williams began his sermon. Brothers and sisters, today, I want to talk about sin. Maggie's spine stiffened. Not the obvious sins, not murder or theft or blasphemy. No, I want to talk about the quiet sins, the ones we carry in secret thinking no one can see. His eyes swept the congregation, and Maggie could have sworn they lingered on her. The sin of pride, the sin of deception, the sin of pretending to be something we're not. A woman in the pew ahead of Maggie turned slightly, her gaze dropping to Maggie's midsection before snapping back to the front. Maggie's face burned. God sees all, Pastor Williams continued. He knows our hearts. He knows our secrets. And he calls us to confession, to repentance, to making right what we have made wrong. The service ended, and Maggie tried to slip out quickly, but the crush of people at the door made escape impossible. She found herself face to face with a group of women she recognized from the boarding house wives of local businessmen, pillars of Stillwater Creek society. Mrs. Holloway. The speaker was Eleanor Thornton, wife of the bank manager, her smile sharp as broken glass. We've been wondering when you'd grace us with your presence. Mrs. Thornton. Maggie kept her voice steady. Good morning. You're looking... well. Eleanor's eyes dropped deliberately to Maggie's belly, now unmistakably rounded beneath her dress. Very well indeed. The women around her tittered. Maggie felt heat rise in her cheeks. Excuse me, I need to get back. Of course you do. Eleanor's voice carried loud enough for nearby churchgoers to hear. Though I do wonder, your husband's been gone, what, 3 months now? 4. And yet you look like you could be 5 months along. Perhaps 6. She tilted her head, feigning confusion. How curious. The implication hung in the air like poison. My husband was a good man, Maggie said quietly. And this is his child. Anyone who says otherwise is a liar. Eleanor's smile widened. No one said anything, dear. Though I suppose if you feel the need to defend yourself. That's enough. The voice came from behind Maggie, deep and firm. She turned to find Sam Brennan standing there, his expression hard as stone. Mr. Brennan. Eleanor's composure flickered. I didn't see you there. I noticed. Sam stepped forward, positioning himself beside Maggie in a way that felt protective without being possessive. Mrs. Holloway is a widow who lost her husband to a tragic accident. She deserves this town's compassion, not its cruelty. I was merely making conversation. No, ma'am. You were making accusations. There's a difference. Sam's voice was calm, but carried an edge that made Eleanor step back. James Holloway was a good man, and his wife is carrying his child. Anyone who suggests otherwise had better be prepared to answer for it. The women exchanged glances, uncertain how to respond. Now, if you'll excuse us. Sam placed his hand lightly at Maggie's elbow. Mrs. Holloway and I have business to discuss. He guided her away from the church, away from the staring eyes, and whispered speculations, not stopping until they reached the relative privacy of the boarding house porch. Thank you, Maggie said, her voice shaking despite her efforts to control it. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Sam's jaw was tight, his eyes still hard with anger. People like Eleanor Thornton think their money gives them the right to tear others down. Someone needs to remind them it doesn't. Maggie sank onto the porch bench, suddenly exhausted. It doesn't matter what you said. They've already made up their minds about me. The timing, the circumstances. She laughed bitterly. In their eyes, I'm either a loose woman who betrayed her husband, or a schemer trying to pass off another man's child as his. Either way, I'm ruined. Sam sat down beside her, leaving a respectable distance between them. Is that what you believe, that you're ruined? It doesn't matter what I believe. It's what they believe that determines my life here. And if they're wrong, if James really was the father, which I'm sure he was, does their ignorance change the truth? Maggie looked at him, surprised by the fierceness in his voice. Why do you care so much? You barely know me. Sam was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the snow-covered street. Because I know what it's like to be judged for something that wasn't your fault. To have people look at you and see only what they've decided you are not who you really are. Your wife, Maggie said softly. You mentioned her before. What happened? Pain flickered across Sam's face, there and gone in an instant. Typhoid fever. Hit our town hard. Mary and our daughter Rose, they both... He stopped, swallowed. The town doctor said there wasn't nothing anyone could have done, but people talked anyway. Said I should have gotten them to a real hospital in the city. Said I was too proud, too stubborn, too poor to save my own family. Sam, it wasn't true. None of it was true. I did everything I could. But it didn't matter. They'd already decided I was to blame. His voice hardened. I left Kansas 3 days after the funeral. Haven't been back since. Maggie reached out her hand, hovering near his for a moment, before she pulled back. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked. No. Sam turned to look at her, his eyes warm despite the grief they held. I'm glad you did. It's been 5 years and I've never told anyone that story. Not the truth of it anyway. He attempted a smile. Guess I figured you of all people would understand. I do. Maggie felt tears prick at her eyes. More than you know. They sat in silence, two wounded people sharing space and understanding on a cold Sunday morning. So what do we do now? Maggie finally asked. How do we survive in a world that's already decided who we are? Sam considered the question. We prove them wrong. Day by day, choice by choice. We show them who we really are until they can't pretend anymore. And if that doesn't work, then at least we'll know we tried. He stood, settling his hat on his head. I should let you get some rest. But I meant what I said, Maggie. You need anything at all, you send word to the Double Diamond. Sam. Maggie stood too, catching his arm before he could descend the steps. Why do you keep coming back? Checking on me. He looked at her hand on his arm, then at her face. Something shifted in his expression, something vulnerable and hopeful and terrifying all at once. Because you're worth checking on, he said simply. And because maybe helping you is helping me too. Gives me something to believe in again. He tipped his hat and was gone, striding down the street toward the livery stable. Maggie watched him go, her heart beating harder than it should have been. Be careful, girl. Martha's voice came from behind her. Maggie turned to find the older woman standing in the doorway, her expression knowing. That man's carrying a weight of grief the size of Montana. You don't want to add to his burden. I know, Maggie said. I'm not looking for anything, Martha. I swear. Maybe not. But the heart has a way of finding what it needs, whether we're looking or not. Martha held the door open. Come inside. You'll catch your death standing out here. Maggie followed her in, but her thoughts stayed on the porch, on Sam's words, on the warmth of his presence beside her, on the dangerous, foolish hope beginning to grow alongside the child in her womb. The weeks that followed were both easier and harder than Maggie expected. Easier because Sam made good on his promise. He came into town every week or so, always finding an excuse to stop by the boarding house. Sometimes it was to bring supplies Martha had ordered. Sometimes it was to check on a loose shingle he'd noticed on the roof. Sometimes it was simply to sit with Maggie on the porch for a few minutes, talking about nothing and everything. Harder because the town's opinion of Maggie showed no signs of improving. If anything, Sam's attention made things worse. The whispers grew louder, the speculation more vicious. They're saying you've bewitched him. Martha reported one morning, her voice matter of fact. That you're a Jezebel who seduced your husband's grave dirt barely cold, and now you've set your sights on the next victim. Maggie's hands stilled on the bread dough. That's ridiculous. Of course it is. But since when has that stopped people from talking? Maybe Sam should stop coming around, for both our sakes. Martha snorted. You think that man's going to stop coming just because you tell him to? I've known Sam Brennan for years. He's the stubbornest creature God ever made, second only to his horse. Despite everything, Maggie smiled. He is stubborn. Takes one to know one, Martha said pointedly. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the back door, an unusual occurrence that made both women freeze. Visitors came through the front. Only delivery men and close friends used the back entrance. Martha wiped her hands on her apron and went to answer it. Maggie heard voices. Martha's sharp tones and a man's deeper rumble before footsteps approached the kitchen. Maggie. Martha's face was carefully neutral. You have a visitor. The man who entered behind her was well dressed with a prosperous belly and thinning hair combed carefully across a balding pate. He carried himself with the confidence of money and position, and his smile showed too many teeth. Mrs. Holloway. He removed his hat, revealing pale, watery eyes that made Maggie's skin crawl. I'm Henry Lawson. I own the general store here in Stillwater. Mr. Lawson. Maggie nodded politely, keeping the work table between them. How can I help you? Oh, I think the question is how I can help you. He moved closer, his gaze traveling over her in a way that felt like fingers on her skin. I've been watching you these past weeks. Hard-working, humble, bearing your burdens with admirable grace. Maggie said nothing. I lost my wife last year, Henry continued. Left me with 3 young children who need a mother's care. I've been looking for the right woman, and well, he spread his hands. Here you are, alone, expecting in need of security. Mr. Lawson. I'm a practical man, Mrs. Holloway. I don't care about gossip. I don't care whose child you're carrying. What I care about is finding a capable wife to run my household and raise my children. He stepped closer still. I can offer you everything you need. A home, respectability, protection from the wagging tongues. And in return, you fulfill your wifely duties. His smile widened. All of them. The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Thank you for your offer, Mr. Lawson. Maggie kept her voice steady despite the revulsion churning in her stomach. But I'm not looking for a husband. Are you sure about that? Henry's tone sharpened. Because from where I'm standing, a pregnant widow with no family and no prospects can't afford to be choosy. The boarding house is fine for now, but what happens when the baby comes? When you can't work anymore? When Martha Quinn decides she's tired of the scandal you bring to her door? I'll manage. Will you? He laughed, a sound without warmth. Pride is a luxury for women with options, Mrs. Holloway. You don't have options. You have me. She said no. The voice came from the doorway, and Maggie's heart leapt as Sam Brennan stepped into the kitchen. His face was hard, his posture coiled with barely contained fury. Henry Lawson turned, his expression shifting from surprise to irritation. This is a private conversation, Brennan. Not anymore. Sam moved to stand beside Maggie, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. The lady gave you her answer. I suggest you accept it. And if I don't, then we're going to have a problem. The two men stared at each other, tension crackling between them. Henry Lawson was the wealthier man, the more respectable one. But Sam Brennan had the look of someone who'd faced down worse threats and survived. Finally, Henry broke. He settled his hat back on his head, his smile returning, but colder now, more dangerous. Very well. I can see I've chosen a bad moment. He turned to Maggie. But think about what I've said, Mrs. Holloway. My offer stands. And unlike some people, his gaze flickered to Sam. I can actually give you a future worth having. He left through the back door, closing it with deliberate care. Maggie released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Thank you. Again. That man's been circling you like a vulture, Sam said darkly. I've seen how he looks at you when you walk to the store. It ain't right. He's not wrong, though. Maggie sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. About me not having options. About what happens when the baby comes. You've got options. Do I name one? Sam was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out a chair and sat across from her, his hat in his hands. The double diamond, he said slowly. Old Mr. Garrett, the owner, he's been looking for someone to help his wife with the cooking and housekeeping. She's been sickly lately, and there's more work than she can manage. It comes with room and board, proper wages, and it's far enough from town that you wouldn't have to deal with folks like Lawson. Maggie stared at him. You're offering me a job at your ranch. I'm telling you there's a job available. Whether you take it is your choice. He met her eyes. It's honest work, Maggie. No strings attached. And when the baby comes, Mrs. Garrett knows her way around a birthing room. She's delivered half the calves on that ranch and a few human babies besides. Why would she hire me? She doesn't even know me. She knows me, and I told her about you. Sam's cheeks colored slightly. About your situation. She said any woman brave enough to face down a Montana blizzard for her baby's sake is woman enough for the double diamond. Maggie felt tears threatening again, a common occurrence these days, whether from pregnancy or emotion she couldn't say. I can't just leave Martha. She took me in when no one else would. Talk to her, Sam said. I'll wait. Maggie found Martha in the front room, sorting linens, with the efficiency of long practice. I heard, Martha said before Maggie could speak. These walls are thinner than people think. Then you know what he's offering. I do. Martha's hands stilled on the sheets. And I think you should take it. Martha. Listen to me, girl. Martha turned to face her fully. I've done what I can for you. But this town isn't going to change its mind, not anytime soon. And Henry Lawson is just the beginning. There'll be others men who see a vulnerable woman and think they can take advantage. Out at the Double Diamond, you'll be protected. Sam Brennan is a good man, whatever else people might say about him. What do they say about him? Martha hesitated. That he's cursed. That everyone he loves dies. That he's got darkness in him that'll never go away. She waved a dismissive hand. Foolishness, all of it. What he's got is grief, same as you. And maybe grief needs grief to heal. Ever think about that? Maggie hadn't. But now that Martha said it, the idea lodged in her heart like a splinter. Go? Martha said, her voice gentler now. Take the job. Give yourself and that baby a chance. And for God's sake, let yourself be happy if happiness comes knocking. Maggie embraced her, this stern woman who'd shown her more kindness than she'd ever expected. Thank you for everything. Don't thank me. Just name the baby after me if it's a girl. Martha's voice was gruff, but her eyes were suspiciously bright. Now go, before I change my mind and put you to work scrubbing floors. Maggie went back to the kitchen, where Sam sat waiting, his expression carefully neutral. I'll take the job, she said. Sam's face broke into a smile, a real smile, the kind that crinkled the corners of his eyes and made him look years younger. Then let's go home, he said. And despite everything, the uncertainty ahead, the scandal behind the child growing in her womb, Maggie smiled back. Home. It had been a long time since she'd had one of those. Maybe, just maybe, she was about to find it again. The Double Diamond sprawled across the Montana Valley, like a promise kept. Maggie saw it first from the ridge, where Sam pulled his horse to a stop, letting her take it in before they descended. It's bigger than I expected, she admitted. Mr. Garrett built it over 30 years, Sam said. Started with just a cabin and a few head of cattle. Now it's one of the largest spreads in the territory. They rode down together, and Maggie felt something loosen in her chest. Out here, miles from Stillwater Creek and its whispered judgments, she could almost believe in second chances. Clara Garrett met them at the main house, a thin woman in her 50s with kind eyes and hands that trembled slightly as she reached for Maggie's. So you're the one Sam's been telling me about. Her voice was warm, despite its weakness. "Welcome to the Double Diamond, dear. Lord knows I need the help. Thank you for giving me this chance, Mrs. Garrett. Clara, please. We don't stand on ceremony out here." She tucked Maggie's arm through hers and led her toward a small cottage set apart from the bunkhouse. "This'll be your place. Nothing fancy, but it's private and warm. Sam fixed up the stove last week, made sure everything was ready." Maggie glanced back at Sam, who was watching from his horse with an expression she couldn't quite read. "He did that? Oh, that man's been preparing for your arrival like a mother hen." Clara laughed softly. "Don't tell him I said so. He thinks he's being subtle." The cottage was small but spotless, with a sturdy bed, a rocking chair by the window, and a kitchen area that had clearly been recently cleaned and stocked. On the table sat a vase of dried wildflowers, a touch so unexpected and tender that Maggie had to blink back tears. "He picked those himself," Clara said quietly. "Rode 3 miles to find them. Said every home needs flowers even in winter." Maggie touched the brittle petals, her heart aching with an emotion she wasn't ready to name. "I'll let you settle in," Clara continued. "Supper's at 6 in the main house, and Maggie—" She paused at the door. "Whatever happened before you came here, it doesn't matter. You're one of us now." The door closed, and Maggie stood alone in her new home, one hand on the flowers and the other on her belly. "We're going to be okay," she whispered to her baby. "I think we're finally going to be okay." The first weeks at the Double Diamond passed in a rhythm that felt almost healing. Maggie rose early, helped Clara with breakfast for the ranch hands, then spent her days cooking, cleaning, mending, and doing whatever needed doing. The work was hard, but satisfying in a way her time at the boarding house hadn't been. Here she was needed. Truly needed. Clara's health was worse than Maggie had realized. Some days the older woman could barely rise from bed, leaving Maggie to manage the household alone. But Clara never complained, and her gratitude for Maggie's help was genuine and constant. "You're a godsend," Clara said one afternoon watching Maggie knead bread dough. "I told Richard that's Mr. Garrett. I told him Sam had finally done something right bringing you here." Maggie smiled. "Sam's been very kind to me." "Kind." Clara's eyes twinkled with knowing. "Is that what we're calling it?" Heat rose in Maggie's cheeks. "Mrs. Garrett, Clara, I'm not. Sam and I aren't." "I know, dear. I'm just teasing." But Clara's expression grew serious. "He's a good man, Maggie. Whatever you've heard about him, whatever darkness people say he carries, it's not the whole truth. He's got more love in him than he knows what to do with. He just needs someone to give it to. He had someone, his wife and daughter." "Yes, and losing them nearly killed him." Clara leaned back in her chair, looking suddenly tired. "I remember when he first came to the Double Diamond about 4 years ago. He was like a ghost. Worked himself to the bone, never spoke unless spoken to, flinched every time someone mentioned family or children. Richard wanted to let him go, said he was too troubled, too unpredictable. But I saw something in him, something worth saving." What changed? Time. Patience. Being given a chance to prove he was more than his worst moment. Clara met Maggie's eyes. Sound familiar? It did. More than Maggie wanted to admit. She saw Sam every day, of course. He took his meals with the ranch hands in the main house, always finding a reason to linger after the others had left. Sometimes he helped Maggie with chores that weren't his responsibility, chopping wood, carrying water, fixing things that weren't really broken. They talked during these times. About nothing important at first. The weather, the cattle, Clara's health. But gradually, the conversations deepened. Sam told her about his childhood in Kansas, about his sisters, and his stern father, and the mother who died when he was 12. Maggie told him about Boston, about her dreams of becoming a seamstress, about the day she met James at a church social, and knew within minutes that she would marry him. "You must have loved him very much," Sam said one evening. They were sitting on the porch of Maggie's cottage watching the sun set behind the mountains. "I did." Maggie pulled her shawl tighter. "He was the first person who ever made me feel like I mattered." like my dreams were worth dreaming. And now? The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to address. Now I dream about my baby, Maggie said finally. About keeping her safe and giving her a good life. Everything else is just... She waved a hand vaguely. Someday. Maybe. Sam nodded slowly. Her... You think it's a girl? I don't know. Just a feeling. Maggie smiled. James wanted a boy. Said he'd teach him to ride and rope and be a proper rancher. But secretly, I always hoped for a girl. Girls are good, Sam said quietly. My Rose was... She was perfect. Smart as a whip, stubborn as her mama. She would have been 7 this year. It was the first time he'd spoken Rose's name since telling Maggie about his past. The intimacy of it made her breath catch. I'm sorry, Sam. I shouldn't have... No. He shook his head. It's all right. It's good, actually. To say her name again. To remember that she was real. He looked at Maggie, his eyes bright with unshed tears. For a long time I tried not to think about them at all. Thought if I could just forget, the pain would go away. But it doesn't work that way, does it? No, Maggie whispered. It doesn't. They sat in silence as the last light faded from the sky, two people bound by loss and slowly learning that grief shared becomes somehow bearable. But peace, Maggie was learning, never lasted long. The trouble started on a Sunday afternoon when a wagon from Stillwater Creek arrived at the Double Diamond. Maggie recognized the driver immediately. Henry Lawson, his face set in an expression of false concern. Mrs. Holloway. He removed his hat as he approached where Maggie stood hanging laundry. I'd hoped to find you here. Maggie's stomach tightened. Mr. Lawson, what brings you all the way out here? Concern for your welfare, naturally. His smile was as oily as she remembered. When I heard you'd left Martha Quinn's establishment to live on a ranch full of unmarried men, I felt it my duty to check on you. A woman in your condition surrounded by such rough company. He shook his head sadly. It doesn't look good, Margaret. It doesn't look good at all. I'm perfectly safe here, Mr. Lawson, and my name is Mrs. Holloway. Of course, of course. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. But surely you must see how this appears. First the scandal of your pregnancy, now this living in a cottage provided by Sam Brennan, a man with his own troubled reputation. People are saying... I don't care what people are saying. Perhaps you should. Henry's mask slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. My offer still stands, Margaret. Marry me, and all of this goes away. The gossip, the judgment, the uncertainty. You'll have a home, a name for your child, a place in society. All you have to do is say yes. And I've already said no. Nothing has changed. Hasn't it? Henry's gaze dropped to her swollen belly. You're what, 6 months along now, 7? The baby will be here before spring. And when it comes, what then? You think the Garretts are going to keep feeding and housing you when you've got an infant screaming at all hours? You think Sam Brennan is going to stick around when the reality of a squalling baby disrupts his comfortable life? Sam isn't what your husband, your protector, your future... Henry laughed. Wake up, Margaret. That man is using you. Whatever kindness he's shown you, it's not for your benefit. It's for his own guilt, his own loneliness, his own needs. And when he's had enough, he'll discard you just like everyone else has. That's enough. Sam's voice cut through the conversation like a blade. He strode toward them from the barn, his face dark with anger. Henry turned, his expression shifting to something that tried to be friendly, but fell far short. Brennan, I was just having a friendly conversation with Mrs. Holloway. Didn't sound friendly to me. Sam positioned himself between Henry and Maggie, his stance protective. I believe she's already given you her answer, several times now. And I believe this is a free country where a man can speak to a woman without interference. Not when that woman has made it clear she doesn't want to be spoken to. Not when you come onto someone else's property uninvited. And not when I can see you're upsetting her." Sam's voice was low, but carried an unmistakable threat. "Leave, now." Henry's face reddened. "You think you can order me around, Brennan? You're nobody. A hired hand with a dead wife and a savior complex. The only reason anyone tolerates you is because old man Garrett needed cheap labor." Something dangerous flickered in Sam's eyes. I said leave. "Or what? You'll hit me. Go ahead. Give me a reason to bring the sheriff into this. Give me a reason to tell everyone in Stillwater Creek that Sam Brennan, the man everyone thought was reformed, is nothing but a violent thug who threatens respectable businessmen." The two men stood inches apart, tension crackling between them like summer lightning. Maggie held her breath, her hand pressed against her belly as if to shield her baby from the conflict. "Sam." She touched his arm gently. "Don't. He's not worth it." Sam didn't move for a long moment. Then slowly he stepped back, his hands unclenched. "Get off this land," he said quietly. "And don't come back." Henry straightened his coat, his composure returning. "This isn't over, Brennan. And Margaret." He turned to her with a smile that made her skin crawl. "When you're ready to be sensible, you know where to find me." He climbed back into his wagon and drove away, leaving dust and unease in his wake. Maggie stood trembling, the encounter having shaken her more than she wanted to admit. "I'm sorry," Sam said, his voice rough. "I shouldn't have let him get to me. You didn't. That's what matters." She touched his arm again, feeling the tension still coiled in his muscles. "Sam, what he said about you. About your guilt and loneliness. Is that why you've been helping me?" Sam flinched as if she'd struck him. "Maggie, I need to know. I need to know if this," she gestured between them, "is real, or if I'm just someone you're helping to make yourself feel better about the past." The question hung between them, more dangerous than any threat Henry Lawson could have made. Sam took a long breath. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "The first time I saw you lying in that snow, I thought you were Mary. For just a second, just one heartbeat, I thought somehow God had given her back to me." He looked at her, his eyes raw with emotion. "But you're not Mary. And what I feel for you isn't about guilt or loneliness or making myself feel better. It's about you, Maggie. Only you." Maggie felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "Sam, I know it's too soon. I know you're still grieving James. I know I've got no right to feel this way about another man's wife, another man's child." His voice broke. "But I can't help it. God help me, I can't help it." He turned and walked away before she could respond, his long strides carrying him toward the barn and the solitude he seemed to need. Maggie stood alone in the winter cold, her hand on her belly, and her heart in chaos. That night she couldn't sleep. Sam's confession played over and over in her mind, tangling with her own confused feelings and the ever-present weight of her grief. Did she love Sam? The question terrified her. James had been dead less than 4 months. 4 months. What kind of woman fell for another man so quickly? What kind of widow betrayed her husband's memory with feelings for someone else? But another voice whispered back. What kind of man rides into a blizzard to save a stranger? What kind of man defends a woman's honor against gossip and threats? What kind of man fills a cottage with wildflowers and never asks for anything in return? The kind of man worth loving, that voice said. The kind of man who deserves to be loved again. She was still wrestling with these thoughts when she heard a soft knock at her door. Maggie pulled on her robe and opened it to find Clara Garrett wrapped in a heavy shawl, her face pale in the moonlight. "Clara, what's wrong? I'm sorry to disturb you, dear, but I think I need..." Clara swayed her hand going to her chest. Something's not right. Maggie caught her just as her knees buckled, guiding her into the cottage and onto the bed. "Stay here. I'm going to get help." She ran across the frozen ground to the main house, her breath forming clouds in the icy air. Richard Garrett was already at the door, having heard the commotion. "It's Clara," Maggie gasped. "Something's wrong with her heart." The next hours were a blur of fear and action. Richard sent a rider to fetch the doctor from town, a full day's journey in good weather, longer in winter. Sam appeared, having heard the commotion, and took charge with the calm efficiency of a man who'd faced crisis before. "Keep her warm," he told Maggie. "Talk to her. Don't let her sleep too deeply." Maggie sat by Clara's bedside through the long night, holding the older woman's hand and telling her stories about Boston, about James, about the baby growing inside her. Anything to keep Clara conscious, to keep her fighting. "You're a good girl," Clara whispered near dawn. "Sam chose well. Don't talk. Save your strength. For what I'm dying, Maggie. We both know it." The words hit Maggie like a physical blow. "Don't say that. The doctor's coming. You're going to be fine." Clara smiled weakly. "I'm not afraid. I've lived a good life. Loved a good man. My only regret—" She paused, gathering breath. "My only regret is leaving Richard alone, and leaving you and Sam when things are just beginning. Clara, please, listen to me." Clara's grip tightened with surprising strength. "Don't let fear stop you from living. Don't let grief steal your future. Sam loves you, anyone can see it. And you love him too, even if you're not ready to admit it yet. I don't know what I feel." "Yes, you do. You're just scared." Clara's eyes closed briefly. "Fear is natural. Loss is natural. But love, real love, is worth the risk. Remember that." The doctor arrived at noon, but there was nothing he could do. Clara Garrett died peacefully that afternoon, with Richard holding one hand and Maggie holding the other. Sam stood in the doorway, his face a mask of grief that echoed Maggie's own. Another loss. Another goodbye. Another reminder that love was fragile and time was short. Maggie wept as Clara's body was prepared for burial. Wept for this kind woman who'd welcomed her without judgment. Wept for Richard, who'd lost his partner of 30 years. Wept for Sam, who was reliving his own terrible memories. But beneath the grief, something else stirred. Clara's words echoed in her heart, refusing to be silenced. Love is worth the risk. Was it? Could she trust herself to love again, knowing how easily it could be taken away? Could she trust Sam with her broken heart and her unborn child and all the uncertainty of their future? She didn't know. But standing at Clara's graveside 2 days later, watching Sam support Richard through the burial, watching the tenderness with which he handled his grief and the old man's, Maggie felt something shift inside her. Not certainty, not yet, but the beginning of something that might, with time and courage, become certainty. After the burial, she found Sam standing alone by the corral, staring at nothing. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I know you cared about her. She was good to me. When I first came here broken and angry and wanting to die, she treated me like a son." His voice was rough. "Now she's gone too. Everyone I care about leaves eventually. Sam, maybe Lawson was right." He turned to face her, his expression bleak. "Maybe all I bring is death and loss. Maybe you should get as far away from me as possible before I curse you too." Maggie stepped closer. "Do you really believe that?" "I don't know what I believe anymore." She reached up and touched his face, feeling the rough stubble beneath her fingers. "I believe Clara was right. I believe love is worth the risk. I believe—" Her voice trembled. "I believe I'm falling in love with you, Sam Brennan, and it terrifies me more than anything I've ever faced." Sam went completely still. "Maggie, I'm not ready for everything. I'm still grieving James, and I have this baby to think about, and the future is so uncertain. But I know what I feel, and I know I don't want to lose you just because I'm too scared to admit it." For a long moment, Sam just looked at her. Then slowly, reverently, he pulled her into his arms and held her like she was the most precious thing in the world. I love you," he whispered against her hair. "I've loved you since you opened your eyes in my cabin and looked at me like I was worth trusting. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve that trust." Maggie held him back, tears streaming down her face. "We'll figure it out together. Whatever comes next, we'll figure it out." They stood there as the winter sun set behind the mountains, two wounded people choosing hope over fear, choosing love over safety, choosing each other. It wasn't a happy ending. Not yet. There was still grief to process and a baby to prepare for, and a world that would judge them harshly. But it was a beginning, and for now, that was enough. The weeks following Clara's death brought a quiet transformation to the Double Diamond. Richard Garrett, broken by grief, retreated into himself, spending long hours in the room he'd shared with Clara for 30 years. The ranch hands did their work in somber silence, the loss of their kind-hearted mistress weighing heavy on everyone. And Sam and Maggie, bound now by their confession at the graveside, navigated the delicate territory between friendship and something more. They didn't speak of love again, not directly. But it lived in the small gestures, Sam's hand lingering on Maggie's when he passed her a cup of coffee, Maggie's fingers brushing his sleeve when she thanked him for chopping wood. It lived in the way they found excuses to be near each other, in the conversations that stretched long into the evening, in the comfortable silences that needed no words. Maggie's belly grew rounder with each passing week, the baby making its presence known through kicks and flutters that made her gasp and smile. Sometimes when they sat together on her cottage porch, she would take Sam's hand and place it against her stomach, letting him feel the life moving inside her. "Strong one," Sam said one evening, his palm warm against her dress. "Gonna be a fighter, just like her mama." "Her." Maggie smiled. "You sound pretty certain." "I got a feeling." Sam's eyes met hers, soft with tenderness. "Mary always said I had a gift for knowing things, said it was spooky." "What else do you know?" Sam was quiet for a moment, his hand still resting on her belly. "I know I want to be there when this baby comes. I know I want to help raise her if you'll let me. And I know—" He hesitated. "I know I want to marry you, Maggie. Soon as you're ready. Soon as you think it's right." Maggie's breath caught. "Sam, you don't have to answer now. I'm not asking for an answer. I'm just telling you what's in my heart." He lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles. "Whenever you're ready. I'll wait as long as it takes." She wanted to say yes. In that moment, watching the firelight play across his weathered face, she wanted nothing more than to become his wife. But something held her back, the shadow of James, the fear of moving too fast, the whisper of doubt that said she didn't deserve this happiness. "Soon," she said softly. "Let me have the baby first. Let me know I can be a good mother before I try to be a good wife." Sam nodded, accepting her answer without disappointment. "Soon then. I can live with soon." But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The letter arrived on a gray February morning, carried by a rider from Stillwater Creek. Maggie was hanging laundry when Sam found her, his face pale and his jaw tight. "What is it?" She straightened, alarm spiking through her. "What's wrong?" "Henry Lawson." Sam's voice was flat. "He's been talking to a lawyer in Helena, making claims about your husband's land." "What kind of claims?" "He says James owed him money. A significant debt apparently dating back to before you were married. He's petitioning the court to seize the property as payment." Maggie felt the blood drain from her face. "That's impossible. James never mentioned any debt. He was careful with money, we both were." "I believe you, but Lawson has documents, signed notes, contracts, witnesses who'll swear they saw James borrow the money." Sam's hands clenched at his sides. "Whether they're real or forged, it doesn't matter. He's got enough to make trouble. But the land, I left it. I haven't been back since I came here. Which is exactly why he's making his move now. If you don't contest it, the court will award him the property by default." Sam met her eyes. "I'm sorry, Maggie. I know it's not much, but it's all you have left of James." Maggie pressed her hand against her stomach, her mind racing. The homestead. The place where she and James had built their dreams. The land her child should have inherited. "I have to go back," she said. "I have to fight this. In your condition, the baby could come any day now." "I don't care." Maggie's chin lifted, determination hardening her voice. "I won't let Henry Lawson steal my husband's legacy. Not without a fight." Sam studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then I'm coming with you. We'll leave at first light." They reached Stillwater Creek 2 days later, having traveled slowly to accommodate Maggie's advanced pregnancy. The journey was difficult, cold, uncomfortable, punctuated by frequent stops, when Maggie's back ached too badly to continue, but she refused to turn back. The town had changed in the months since she'd left, or maybe it was just her perception that had changed. The buildings looked smaller, meaner. The faces of the people they passed held no welcome, only wary curiosity, and in some cases, open hostility. Martha Quinn met them at the boarding house door, her expression a mixture of relief and worry. "Thank God you're here. I sent word soon as I heard what Lawson was planning." She ushered them inside, casting nervous glances at the street. "The whole town's been talking about it. Half of them think you're a fool for coming back, and the other half think you should have stayed to defend your claim in the first place." "What about the other half?" Maggie asked. "There ain't another half-child. That's just people for you all opinions and no sense." Martha helped Maggie into a chair, her hands gentle despite her sharp words. "You look ready to pop. When's that baby due?" "Another 3 weeks, maybe 4. Martha's eyes narrowed. "I've seen enough pregnant women to know that babies come when they're ready, not when we expect them. You shouldn't be traveling in your condition." "I had to come. Lawson is trying to steal everything James worked for." "I know, and I know you've got more spine than sense. You proved that the first time you showed up here, half-starved and stubborn as a mule." Martha's voice softened. "But this fight isn't just about land anymore, Maggie. It's about power. Lawson wants you humiliated, dependent, broken. He wants you to have no choice but to come crawling to him." "Then he doesn't know me very well." "No." Martha almost smiled. "I don't suppose he does." The hearing was scheduled for the following afternoon before Judge Patterson, Doc Patterson's brother. As it turned out, a portly man with a reputation for fairness and a weakness for whiskey. Maggie spent the morning preparing, going over the few documents she had with Sam and Martha, trying to remember every conversation she'd ever had with James about money and debts and their financial situation. "He never mentioned owing anyone," she insisted. "We lived frugally, saved every penny we could. James was proud that we didn't owe a single cent to anyone." "Then either Lawson is lying outright or someone forged those documents," Sam said grimly. "Neither would surprise me. Can we prove it?" "I don't know, but we're going to try." The courthouse was packed when they arrived. Word of the hearing had spread, and half the town had turned out to watch the show. Maggie felt the weight of every stare as she walked down the aisle, Sam's steadying hand at her elbow. Henry Lawson sat at the plaintiff's table, immaculately dressed, his expression one of barely concealed triumph. When he saw Maggie, he smiled a cold, reptilian smile that made her skin crawl. "Mrs. Holloway." He inclined his head in mock courtesy. "I'm so glad you could join us. I was afraid you might not come." "I wouldn't miss it," Maggie replied coolly. "I've been looking forward to watching you explain how my husband apparently owed you money he never mentioned to his own wife. Perhaps he didn't want to worry you. Some men are protective that way. And some men are liars." Before Lawson could respond, Judge Patterson called the hearing to order. The courtroom fell silent as the proceedings began. Lawson presented his case first, producing a series of documents he claimed proved James Holloway had borrowed $300 from him 2 years earlier, a substantial sum that, with interest, now exceeded the value of the homestead itself. "These notes are signed by James Holloway," Lawson said, handing the papers to the judge. "Witnessed by 2 upstanding citizens of this community. The debt is clear, Your Honor. Mrs. Holloway's refusal to acknowledge it is simply denial. Judge Patterson examined the documents, his brow furrowed. These appear to be in order. Mrs. Holloway, what is your response? Maggie stood, her hands trembling despite her determination to appear calm. Your Honor, in the 2 years I was married to James Holloway, he never once mentioned any debt to Mr. Lawson. We discussed our finances regularly. We kept careful records. There was never any indication that he owed anyone money. With respect, Your Honor, Lawson interjected smoothly, Mrs. Holloway's ignorance of her husband's debts doesn't negate their existence. Many men keep financial matters from their wives. Not James, Maggie insisted. He believed in partnership. He told me everything. Everything. Lawson's smile widened. Did he tell you about the gambling Mrs. Holloway? The cards he played at the saloon in Helena during his supply trips? The debts he accumulated trying to win back what he'd lost? Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Maggie felt the floor shift beneath her feet. That's a lie. Is it? Lawson produced another document. This is a statement from the proprietor of the Golden Nugget Saloon in Helena. He'll testify that James Holloway was a regular customer and that he lost significant sums at the poker tables on multiple occasions. That's impossible. Perhaps your husband wasn't the man you thought he was, Mrs. Holloway. Perhaps he had secrets. We all do, don't we? Lawson's gaze dropped meaningfully to her swollen belly. Some more than others. The implication was clear. The courtroom buzzed with whispered speculation. Maggie opened her mouth to respond, but Sam was already on his feet. Your Honor, I'd like to speak on Mrs. Holloway's behalf. Judge Patterson raised an eyebrow. And you are? Sam Brennan, foreman at the Double Diamond Ranch, and a friend of the Holloway family. A friend. Lawson's voice dripped with insinuation. How touching. Mr. Brennan, do you have evidence to present? The judge asked, ignoring Lawson's comment. Not evidence, Your Honor, but I have questions. Sam stepped forward, his presence commanding, despite his simple clothing. Mr. Lawson, you claim James Holloway owed you $300. That's a significant sum. Why did you wait until after his death to collect? Lawson's smile flickered. Out of respect for a grieving widow, of course. I had hoped Mrs. Holloway would settle the debt privately without the need for legal intervention. Yet you never approached her directly with these documents until she rejected your marriage proposal. Twice. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Patterson leaned forward with interest. What marriage proposal? The judge asked. Mr. Lawson has repeatedly asked Mrs. Holloway to marry him. Sam continued, his voice steady. She refused each time. And now suddenly he produces documents claiming her husband owed him a debt that, if valid, would strip her of her only remaining property and leave her with no options. That's a serious accusation, Judge Patterson said, looking at Lawson. Are you suggesting these documents are fraudulent? I'm suggesting the timing is suspicious, Your Honor. I'm suggesting that a man who wants a woman badly enough might manufacture reasons to make her dependent on him. And I'm suggesting that before this court rules on the validity of these claims, Mrs. Holloway deserves the chance to have the documents examined by an independent expert. Judge Patterson considered this for a long moment. Mr. Lawson, do you have any objection to an examination of these documents? For the first time, something like uncertainty crossed Lawson's face. The documents are genuine, Your Honor. Any examination will only confirm that. Then you have nothing to worry about. The judge set down the papers. I'm postponing this hearing for 2 weeks. That should give Mrs. Holloway time to have these documents reviewed and prepare a proper defense. In the meantime, the property remains in her name, and no action may be taken against it. Your Honor, Lawson began. My decision is final, Mr. Lawson. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down, and Maggie nearly collapsed with relief. Sam caught her arm, steadying her. It's not over, he murmured. But we bought some time. Time for what? We don't have anyone who can examine those documents. No, but I know someone who might. Someone from my past in Kansas. Sam's expression was troubled. "I'll need to send a telegram. If he's still alive and if he's willing to help." "Who is he?" "His name is Thomas Reed. He was a clerk at the courthouse in Lawrence, a genius with documents. He could spot a forgery at 20 paces. Sam paused. "He was also the one who believed me when I said the typhoid epidemic wasn't my fault, helped clear my name when others were ready to string me up. Why would he come all this way to help us? Because he owes me a favor, and because he hates liars even more than I do." The telegram went out that afternoon. Then there was nothing to do but wait. Maggie moved back into the boarding house, unable to make the long journey back to the Double Diamond in her condition. Sam stayed too, taking a room at the livery stable despite Martha's offers of proper accommodation. "People are talking enough already," he said. "No point giving them more ammunition. Since when do you care what people think? I don't. But you're about to have a baby in a town that's already decided it hates you. The last thing you need is more scandal." The days passed slowly, each one heavier than the last. Maggie's due date came and went with no sign of the baby. Her back ached constantly now, her ankles swollen, her sleep fitful, and interrupted by the child's movements inside her. And still no word from Thomas Reed. "What if he doesn't come?" Maggie asked Sam one evening, sitting on the boarding house porch as the sun set over Stillwater Creek. "What if he's dead or gone, or just doesn't want to get involved? Then we'll find another way." Sam's hand covered hers. "I won't let Lawson win Maggie, I promise you that. Some promises can't be kept. You know that better than anyone." "I do." He turned to look at her, his eyes soft with something that might have been sorrow, or might have been hope. "But this one I intend to keep. For you. For the baby. For us." Us. Maggie repeated the word, tasting it. "Is there an us, Sam, really, with everything that's happened? Everything that might still happen? There's always been an us." Sam raised her hand to his lips. "From the moment I pulled you out of that snowbank, there's been an us. I just didn't know it yet." Maggie felt tears prick at her eyes. "I'm scared, Sam. I'm scared of losing everything. The land, my reputation, my chance at happiness. I'm scared of bringing a baby into a world that doesn't want us." "The world wants you." Sam's voice was fierce. "Maybe this town doesn't see it yet, but the world needs people like you, Maggie. Strong people, brave people, people who keep fighting even when everything seems hopeless." He cupped her face in his hands. "And that baby is going to be born into a world with a mother who loves her more than anything. That's all that matters. Everything else we'll figure out together." Maggie closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. "I love you," she whispered. "I should have said it before now. I should have said it every day since Clara's funeral. I love you, Sam Brennan. And whatever happens next, I want to face it with you." Sam's breath caught. "Say it again. I love you." He kissed her, then gentle and reverent, as if she were something precious and fragile. When he pulled back, his eyes were shining. "When this is over," he said hoarsely, "I'm going to marry you. Not because you need me, not because you're in trouble, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it. Is that understood?" Maggie smiled through her tears. "Understood." They sat together in the fading light, hands intertwined, hearts full of hope, despite the uncertainty ahead. And for one perfect moment, the world outside, with its gossip and grudges and legal battles, faded away, leaving only two people who had found in each other the courage to love again. But the moment couldn't last. 3 days later, Maggie woke in the middle of the night to a gush of warm fluid and a pain that seized her entire body. "Sam!" She gasped his name, though she knew he couldn't hear her from the livery stable. "Sam!" Martha burst through the door moments later, summoned by Maggie's cries. One look was all she needed. "The baby's coming. Hold on, child. I'll fetch the doctor." "Wait." Another contraction gripped Maggie, stealing her breath. "Get Sam, please. I need Sam." Martha hesitated only a moment before nodding. "I'll send someone. You just keep breathing. Everything's going to be fine." But as another wave of pain crashed over her, Maggie wasn't sure she believed it. The baby was early, the timing was wrong, and somewhere out there, Henry Lawson was plotting her ruin. She closed her eyes and prayed for her child, for Sam, for a future that suddenly seemed more fragile than ever. The night was going to be long, and by morning everything would change. The pain came in waves, each one stronger than the last. Maggie gripped the bedsheets until her knuckles turned white, her body caught in a battle she couldn't control. "Breathe, child." Martha pressed a cool cloth to her forehead. "Doc Patterson's on his way. Just keep breathing." "Sam," Maggie gasped between contractions. "Where's Sam?" "He's coming. The boy I sent will find him." Another wave crashed over her and Maggie cried out. This was different from what she'd expected, fiercer, more consuming. Her whole world narrowed to the pain and the primal need to push. "Not yet," Martha warned. "Wait for the doctor. The baby's not ready." "The baby?" Maggie's voice broke. "Something's wrong. I can feel it." The door burst open, and Sam rushed in, his hair wild, his shirt untucked. He crossed the room in 3 strides and took Maggie's hand, his face pale with fear. "I'm here. I'm right here." "Sam." She clung to him like he was the only solid thing in a world gone liquid with pain. "I'm scared." "I know. But you're the strongest person I've ever met, Maggie Holloway. You survived a blizzard, you stood up to this whole damn town, you fought for your husband's land. You can do this." He kissed her forehead. "And I'll be right here the whole time." Doc Patterson arrived 20 minutes later, his medical bag in hand, and his expression grim. He examined Maggie quickly, his experienced hands moving with practiced efficiency. "The baby's breech," he announced. "Turned around wrong. We're going to have to work together to get this little one out safely." Maggie felt terror grip her heart. "Is the baby going to be all right?" "If we do this right, yes. But I need you to trust me, Mrs. Holloway. I need you to do exactly what I say when I say it. Can you do that?" "Yes." She squeezed Sam's hand. "Yes, I can do that." What followed was the longest night of Maggie's life. Hours of pushing and resting, of pain so intense, she thought she might die from it, of Doc Patterson's calm voice guiding her through each contraction. Sam never left her side, holding her hand, wiping her brow, murmuring words of encouragement when her strength flagged. "I can't," she sobbed at one point. "I can't do this anymore." "Yes, you can." Sam's voice was fierce. "You're almost there, Maggie. Just a little more." "I'm so tired." "I know, but think about the baby. Think about holding her in your arms. Think about the life we're going to build together." His eyes burned into hers. "You can do this. I believe in you." Something shifted inside Maggie, not physically, but somewhere deeper. A well of strength she didn't know she had. She gripped Sam's hand harder and pushed with everything she had left. And then, just as dawn began to pink the sky outside her window, she heard it, a thin, wavering cry that grew stronger with each breath. "It's a girl," Doc Patterson announced, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "A beautiful, healthy girl." He placed the baby in Maggie's arms, and the world stopped. She was perfect. Tiny fingers, a rosebud mouth, a dusting of dark hair. She looked up at Maggie with unfocused eyes that would someday be blue or brown or green, and Maggie felt her heart crack open and rearrange itself around this new, fierce love. "Hello, little one," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Hello, my darling girl." Sam leaned over them both, his own eyes wet. "She's beautiful, just like her mama." "Would you like to hold her?" Sam hesitated, something flickering in his expression, fear, longing, hope. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." She placed the baby in his arms, watching as this strong, scarred man cradled her daughter with infinite gentleness. His hands trembled slightly, but his touch was sure. "Hey there, sweetheart," he murmured. "Welcome to the world. I'm hoping to be your pa someday if your mama will have me." Maggie laughed through her tears. "I think she will." Sam looked up, his eyes shining. Yeah. He leaned down and kissed her, gentle, reverent, full of promise. The baby gurgled between them as if giving her blessing. "What are you going to name her?" Martha asked from the doorway, her sharp features softened by the morning light. Maggie considered for a moment. "Clara," she said finally. "Clara Rose Holloway, after the woman who gave me a home and the daughter Sam lost." Sam made a choked sound, his arms tightening around the baby. "Maggie, is that all right?" "It's more than all right." His voice was rough with emotion. "It's perfect." Clara Rose Holloway, born at dawn on a February morning, her first breath a declaration of hope in a world that had given her mother every reason to despair. The days that followed were a haze of feeding and sleeping, and the overwhelming, terrifying, beautiful reality of new motherhood. Sam stayed close, helping in every way he could, holding Clara, while Maggie rested, fetching supplies from the general store, standing guard against the whispers and stares of a town still eager to judge. But even in the fog of exhaustion and new baby joy, Maggie couldn't forget what was coming. The hearing, the documents, the threat that Henry Lawson still posed to everything she'd fought for. A week after Clara's birth, the answer arrived in the form of a telegram. Sam found Maggie nursing the baby and handed her the paper, his expression unreadable. "Thomas Reed. He's coming. Should arrive on tomorrow's stage. He agreed to help. More than that, he says he's already found something that might change everything." Hope flickered in Maggie's chest, dangerous, fragile hope. What did he find? He didn't say. Just that we should be ready for the hearing and that he's bringing proof. The next 24 hours passed agonizingly slowly. Maggie tried to focus on Clara, on Sam, on the quiet moments of peace that had become her refuge. But her mind kept circling back to the hearing, to Lawson, to the uncertain future that hung over them all. Thomas Reed arrived on the afternoon stage, a slight, bespectacled man in his 40s, with sharp eyes and ink-stained fingers. He greeted Sam with a firm handshake, and Maggie with a courteous nod. "Mrs. Holloway, I've heard a great deal about you. I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances." "Mr. Reed, I can't thank you enough for coming all this way." "Don't thank me yet." He set his leather satchel on Martha's kitchen table and began withdrawing documents. "I've spent the past week examining the papers Mr. Lawson submitted to the court, the signatures, the dates, the paper itself, and I can tell you without hesitation that they're forgeries, good ones, but forgeries nonetheless." Maggie's heart leaped. "Can you prove it?" "I can do better than that." Thomas's eyes gleamed with something like satisfaction. "I can prove who made them." The hearing reconvened 3 days later, the courtroom even more crowded than before. Word had spread about the mysterious expert from Kansas, and the town had turned out in force to see what would happen. Henry Lawson sat at his table, his confidence seemingly intact. But Maggie noticed the way his eyes kept darting to Thomas Reed. He was nervous. "Good." Judge Patterson called the court to order and turned to Maggie's side of the room. "Mrs. Holloway, I understand you have new evidence to present." "Yes, Your Honor." Maggie stood Clara sleeping peacefully in Martha's arms at the back of the courtroom. "I'd like to call Mr. Thomas Reed as a witness." Thomas approached the stand, was sworn in, and began his testimony with the precision of a man who'd spent his life studying documents and their secrets. The papers Mr. Lawson submitted as proof of James Holloway's debt contained several irregularities. He began producing the forged documents and spreading them on a table before the judge. First, the ink used for the signatures is of a different composition than the ink used for the body of the text. This suggests they were written at different times, possibly months apart. "That proves nothing," Lawson interjected. "People use different pens." "Perhaps, but there's more. Thomas produced a magnifying glass and pointed to specific areas of the documents. The signatures purporting to be James Holloway's contained subtle inconsistencies. The pressure, the angle, the spacing between letters all suggest these were traced from a genuine signature rather than written naturally. Speculation, Lawson snapped. Let him finish, Judge Patterson ordered. Thomas nodded. Most damning of all is the paper itself. These documents are supposedly 2 years old, yes, but the paper they're written on wasn't manufactured until 18 months ago. I've traced the watermark to a mill in Chicago that only began production in the spring of 1882. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. That's impossible, Lawson said, his voice rising. Those documents are genuine. I watched James Holloway sign them myself. Then you're either mistaken or lying, Mr. Lawson, because the physical evidence tells a different story. Thomas paused, letting his words sink in. And there's one more thing, Your Honor. I believe I can identify the person who actually created these forgeries. Silence fell over the courtroom like a held breath. In my examination, I noticed certain distinctive characteristics in the handwriting, the formation of specific letters, the pressure patterns, the angle of the strokes. These characteristics are unique to each individual, like a fingerprint. Thomas pulled out another document. This is a sample of Mr. Lawson's own handwriting obtained from public records in this very courthouse. The same distinctive characteristics appear in the forged sections of the debt documents. The courtroom erupted. Judge Patterson banged his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. Mr. Lawson, the judge said when the noise finally died down, do you have anything to say in response to these allegations? Lawson had gone pale, sweat beading on his forehead. This is preposterous. I'm a respected businessman. I would never. You would never what? Sam stood, his voice cutting through the chaos. Never forge documents to steal a widow's land. Never harass a pregnant woman into marrying you. Never destroy a good man's reputation to satisfy your own greed. Sit down, Mr. Brennan, Judge Patterson warned. With respect, Your Honor, I've sat down long enough. This entire town has sat down while Henry Lawson preyed on a woman who had no one to protect her, while he spread lies and rumors and made her life a living hell. Sam's voice shook with fury. James Holloway was a good man, his widow is a good woman, and their daughter deserves to inherit her father's land without a snake like Lawson trying to steal it from her. That's enough. Lawson surged to his feet, his composure finally cracking. You think you're so righteous, Brennan? You think anyone's fooled by this noble protector act? Everyone knows why you're really helping her. Everyone knows what you want. What I want is justice, Sam said quietly. Something you wouldn't recognize if it bit you. You want her land. You want her money. I want to marry her. Sam's voice carried across the silent courtroom. I want to spend the rest of my life with her and help raise her daughter. Not because of money or land, but because I love her. And that's something you could never understand, Lawson, because you don't know how to love anything except yourself. Maggie felt tears streaming down her face. She rose from her seat, ignoring the stares and whispers. It's true, she said, her voice clear despite her emotion. Sam Brennan asked me to marry him, and I said yes. Not because I needed saving, but because he saw me when no one else did. Because he stood by me when this whole town turned its back. Because he's a good man, a better man than you could ever hope to be. Henry Lawson. Judge Patterson banged his gavel one final time. Order. I will have order in this courtroom. The noise subsided slowly. The judge looked from Lawson to Maggie to Sam, his expression grave. Based on the testimony presented today, I find the debt documents submitted by Mr. Lawson to be fraudulent. The claim against the Holloway property is dismissed. He turned to Lawson, his voice hardening. Mr. Lawson, you will remain in custody, pending a full investigation into forgery charges. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down, and Maggie felt her knees buckle. Sam caught her, holding her close, as the courtroom dissolved into chaos around them. It's over, he murmured against her hair. It's finally over. Is it? Maggie pulled back to look at him. Did you mean what you said about marrying me? Every word. Sam cupped her face in his hands. Margaret Holloway, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not today, not even tomorrow, but whenever you're ready. Maggie laughed through her tears. I'm ready now. I've been ready since you kissed me at Clara's grave. Sam kissed her, then right there in the courtroom in front of God and the judge and half of Stillwater Creek. And when he pulled back, his eyes shining with tears and joy and hope, Maggie knew that everything, every hardship, every loss, every moment of despair had led her to this. To him, to them, to the family they would build together. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church where Eleanor Thornton had tried to humiliate her and Pastor Williams had preached about hidden sins. This time the church was filled with different energy, Martha Quinn dabbing at her eyes in the front pew. Richard Garrett having made the long journey from the Double Diamond to give Maggie away. Thomas Reed standing as Sam's best man. Clara, dressed in a tiny white gown Martha had sewn for the occasion, slept peacefully through the entire ceremony, waking only to gurgle contentedly as the pastor pronounced her mother and Sam husband and wife. I now present to you Mr. and Mrs. Samuel Brennan. Sam turned to face the congregation, Maggie on his arm, and something shifted in the room. The people who had whispered about her, judged her, tried to destroy her. They were watching now with different eyes. Some with shame. Some with grudging respect. Some, perhaps, with the beginning of acceptance. It didn't matter anymore. Maggie had found her place not in their approval, but in her own strength. In Sam's love. In the family they had chosen to become. After the ceremony, they stood on the church steps as the townspeople filed past. Some offered genuine congratulations. Others simply nodded awkwardly. But one encounter stood out. Eleanor Thornton approached her face a complicated mix of emotions Maggie couldn't quite read. Mrs. Brennan, she said stiffly. I wanted to say. Maggie waited prepared for another barb, another judgment. But Eleanor surprised her. I was wrong about you. About a lot of things. She glanced at Clara in Maggie's arms. I hope you'll be very happy. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was close enough. Thank you, Mrs. Thornton, Maggie said simply. I intend to be. They returned to the Double Diamond that spring when the snow had melted and the valleys were beginning to green. Richard Garrett had offered them a parcel of land adjacent to the main ranch, a wedding gift, he said, and a thank you for everything Maggie had done for Clara in her final days. Sam built them a house there with his own hands and the help of the ranch hands who had come to respect and admire both him and his new bride. It wasn't grand, but it was solid and warm and filled with love. On the day they moved in, Maggie stood on the porch with Clara in her arms, watching Sam hang a sign above the door. What's that? She asked. Something I've been working on. Sam stepped back to reveal the carved wooden letters, The Brennan Place. I thought we should make it official, he said, his arm coming around her shoulders. This is our home now, ours and Clara's and any other children God might bless us with. Other children? Maggie smiled up at him. Getting ahead of yourself, aren't you? Maybe. He kissed her forehead. But I figure after everything we've been through, we're allowed to dream big. Maggie leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. In her arms, Clara cooed and reached toward her father, her tiny fingers grasping at his shirt. I used to think my story ended when James died, Maggie said softly. I thought I was just surviving after that, waiting for the end. And now? Now I know better. That wasn't the end. It was just the middle, the hard part that you have to get through to reach the good part. She looked up at Sam, her eyes bright with tears and joy. This is the good part, Sam. You and me and Clara and whatever comes next. This is the life I was meant to have. Sam held her closer, his voice rough with emotion. I love you, Margaret Brennan. Today and tomorrow and every day after. I love you too, Samuel Brennan. More than I ever thought I could love anyone again. They stood together on the porch of their new home, watching the sun set over the mountains, their daughter nestled between them. Behind them lay grief and struggle, and a town that had nearly broken them. Ahead lay uncertainty, as it always did. But in this moment, there was only peace, only hope, only love. Clara stirred in Maggie's arms, her eyes fluttering open to gaze at her parents with the untroubled trust of a child who has never known anything but safety. "Welcome home, little one," Maggie whispered. "This is where you belong." Sam tightened his arms around his family, his heart full to bursting with a joy he'd thought he would never feel again. Once he had been a broken man who'd lost everything, a wanderer with no hope and no home, a ghost haunting his own life. Now he was a husband, a father, a man with roots sunk deep into Montana soil and a future stretching bright before him. The road that brought them here had been long and hard, paved with loss and loneliness, and the cruel judgments of people who couldn't see past their own prejudices. But every step of that journey had led to this porch, this sunset, this woman and child who had given him back his life. Some stories ended in tragedy. Some ended in bitterness and regret. But this one, this story of a pregnant widow and a wounded cowboy and a baby born in the midst of a storm, this one ended in redemption, in family, in love. And as the last light faded from the Montana sky and the stars began to emerge one by one, Sam Brennan made a silent promise to the woman in his arms and the child she held. He would spend every day of his life earning this happiness, protecting this family, building something that would last long after he was gone, because that was what love meant. Not grand gestures or pretty words, but the quiet commitment to show up day after day and do the work of building a life together. Maggie turned her face up to his, her eyes reflecting the starlight, and smiled. "Take us inside," she said softly. "Take us home." Sam Brennan did exactly that, and in a small house on the Montana frontier, a family began.